strangers to each other. In this way, personal as opposed to tribal loyalty makes possible an increase in the size of the group without doing violence to instinct. At a certain stage, a further development took place. Wars, which originally were wars of extermination, gradually became, at least in part, wars of conquest. The vanquished, instead of being put to death, were made slaves and compelled to labor for their conquerors. When this happened, there came to be two sorts of people within a community, namely the original members who alone were free and were the repositories of the tribal spirit, and the subjects who obeyed from fear and not from instinctive loyalty. Nineveh and Babylon ruled over vast territories, not because their subjects had any instinctive sense of social cohesion with the dominant city, but solely because of the terror inspired by its prowess in war. From those early days down to modern times, war has been the chief engine in enlarging the size of communities, and fear has increasingly replaced tribal solidarity as a source of social cohesion. This change was not confined to large communities. It occurred, for example, in Sparta, where the free citizens were a small minority, while the helots were unmercifully suppressed. Sparta was praised throughout antiquity for its admirable social cohesion, but it was a cohesion which never attempted to embrace the whole population, except insofar as terror compelled outward loyalty. At a certain stage in the development of civilization, a new kind of loyalty began to be developed, a loyalty based not on territorial affinity or similarity of race, but on identity of creed. So far as the West is concerned, this seems to have originated with the Orphic communities, which admitted slaves on equal terms. Apart from them, religion in antiquity was so closely associated with government that groups of co-religionists were broadly identical with the groups that had grown up on the old biological basis. But identity of creed has gradually become a stronger and stronger force. Its military strength was first displayed by Islam in the conquests of the 7th and 8th centuries. It supplied the moving force in the Crusades and in the wars of religion. In the 16th century, theological loyalties very often outweighed those of nationality. English Catholics sided with Spain, French Huguenots with England. In our own day, two widespread creeds embrace the loyalty of a very large part of mankind. One of these, the creed of communism, has the advantage of intense fanaticism and embodiment in a sacred book. The other, less definite, is nevertheless potent. It may be called the American way of life. America, formed by immigration from many different countries, has no biological unity, but it has a unity quite as strong as that of European nations. As Abraham Lincoln said, it is dedicated to a proposition. Immigrants into America, or at any rate their children, for the most part find the American way of life preferable to that of the old world, and believe firmly that it would be for the good of mankind if this way of life became universal. Both in America and in Russia, unity of creed and national unity have coalesced, and have thereby acquired a new strength. But these rival creeds have an attraction which transcends their national boundaries. Modern loyalty to the vast groups of our time, insofar as it is strong and subjectively satisfying, makes use still of the old psychological mechanism evolved in the days of small tribes. Congenital human nature, as opposed to what is made of it by schools and religions, by propaganda and economic organizations, has not changed much since the time when men first began to have brains of about the size to which we are accustomed. Instinctively, we divide mankind into friends and foes. Friends, towards whom we have the morality of cooperation; foes, towards whom we have that of competition. But this division is constantly changing. At one moment, a man hates his business competitor. At another, when both are threatened by socialism or by an external enemy, he suddenly begins to view him as a brother. Always, when we pass beyond the limits of the family, it is the external enemy which supplies the cohesive force. In times of safety, we can afford to hate our neighbor. but in times of danger we must love him. We do not at most times love those whom we find sitting next us in a bus, but during the Blitz we did. It is this that makes the difficulty of devising means of worldwide unity. A world state, if it were firmly established, would have no enemies to fear, and would therefore be in danger of breaking down through lack of cohesive force. The great religions, Buddhism and Christianity, have sought to extend the cooperative feeling that is spontaneous towards fellow tribesmen to the whole human race. They have preached the brotherhood of man, showing by the use of the word brotherhood that they are attempting to extend beyond its natural bounds an emotional attitude which in its origin is biological. If we are all children of God, then we are all one family. But in practice, those who in theory adopted this creed have always felt that those who did not adopt it were not children of God, but children of Satan, and the old mechanism of hatred of those outside the tribe has returned, giving added vigor to the creed, but in a direction which diverted it from its original purpose. Religion, morality, economic self-interest, the mere pursuit of biological survival, all supply to our intelligence unanswerable arguments in favor of worldwide cooperation. But the old instincts that have come down to us from our tribal ancestors rise up in indignation, feeling that life would lose its savor if there were no one to hate, and that anyone who could love such a scoundrel as so-and-so would be a worm, and that struggle is the law of life, and that in a world where we all loved one another, there would be nothing left to live for. If the unification of mankind is ever to be realized, it will be necessary to find ways of circumventing our largely unconscious primitive ferocity, partly by establishing the reign of law, and partly by finding innocent outlets for our competitive instincts. This is not an easy problem, and it is one which cannot be solved by morality alone. Psychoanalysis, though no doubt it has its exaggerations and even perhaps absurdities, has taught us a great deal that is true and valuable. It is an old saying that even if you expel nature with a pitchfork, it will still come back. But psychoanalysis has supplied the commentary to this text. We now know that a life which goes against natural impulse beyond a point is one which is likely to involve effects of strain that may be quite as bad as indulgence in forbidden impulses would have been. People who live a life which is unnatural beyond a point are likely to be filled with envy, malice, and all uncharitableness. They may develop strains of cruelty, or, on the other hand, they may so completely lose all joy of life that they have no longer any capacity for effort. This latter result has been observed among savages brought suddenly in contact with modern civilization. Anthropologists have described how Papuan headhunters, deprived by white authority of their habitual sport, lose all zest and are no longer able to be interested in anything. I do not wish to infer that they should have been allowed to go on hunting heads, but I do mean that it would have been worthwhile if psychologists had taken some trouble to find some innocent substitute activity. Civilized man everywhere is, to some degree, in the position of the Papuan victims of virtue. We have all kinds of shocking impulses, and also creative impulses, which society forbids us to indulge, and the alternatives that it supplies, in the shape of football matches and all-in wrestling, are hardly adequate. Anyone who hopes that in time it may be possible to abolish war should give serious thought to the problem of satisfying harmlessly the instincts that we inherit from long generations of savages. For my part, I find a sufficient outlet in detective stories, where I alternatively identify myself with the murderer and the huntsman detective. But I know there are those to whom this vicarious outlet is too mild, and for them something stronger should be provided. I do not think that ordinary human beings can be happy without competition, for competition has been, ever since the origin of man, the spur to most serious activities. We should not therefore attempt to abolish competition,